Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 14 of The Last of the Jedi Underworld. So when we pick up where we last left off, and before I do get into what the details, I need to give a little bit of background because this is probably going to be the most I have to say about the chapter. When it came to Trevor, I have quite often mentioned that while I do prefer Trevor because of how much more funny he is compared to Ferris, I do think Ferris is a better character, and also he does rank above Trevor for me in my list of favourite characters in Star Wars. And it's mainly because Ferris, compared to Trevor, has a lot more depth. His past is much more relevant to his character, and I'm not trying to say that Trevor's past isn't relevant to his character. You know, when we first met him, he's suffering the consequences of his past, but unlike Ferris, his past isn't brought up a whole lot. It's often something that gets the occasional mention, but doesn't get brought up a lot. Compare that to Ferris. You know, Ferris has his past brought up all the time in the books. In Underworld alone, Trevor's past has only been brought up about 3 times, and you compare that to Ferris, and his past has been brought up in almost every chapter. 2 of those times for Trevor, it was one of them being now, and the first one being when it was. Oh, I can't remember now. Being that he wanted to do anything to fight the Empire that destroyed his family, and also the third time being when we learn that his brother Tyke taught him how to change the blast and how to alter how powerful a grenade can be. And aside from those 2 instances and this instance I'm about to get into, we haven't had a whole lot of mentions. So this instance in the summary I'm about to give is what I've been kind of waiting for, and it's something that I think we really need to see a bit more of with Trevor. Again, I enjoy Trevor, but I think Ferris is the better character because of how much more his past is brought up and how much more it affects him. As Trevor, it's more of just the occasional bring up and mainly there to also remind you. Anyway, into the summary now. We pick up exactly where we left off, and right after Ferris says, right, I'm coming with you, Solace, Trevor says, I'm coming with you too. And Trevor looks at Ferris's face and he sees the expression on it, which is clearly just saying, oh no, not this again. But Trevor does not care. His father, his mother, his brother had all said, stay here, it's too dangerous, you'll be safe. And they had all said, we'll be back for you, we'll be back. They never came back. They never came back. They all died. And Ferris says that there's only 2 seats there, and that before we can even finish saying he'll be back for him, he just gets as far as, I'll be back, and that's when Trevor immediately cuts in and says, no, don't say that, just no, or just don't. And it's a very impactful scene, and this is really what I've been wanting to see a bit more of with Trevor. This is such a scene that really is impactful, and it's really is heartbreaking. And Trevor, he wants to come. He does not want to be left behind and lose Ferris. And if Ferris does die, he wants to die with him. And I think that's a very impactful scene. And then Trevor starts listing off a few reasons as to why he should come. He says that, well, he's been in the temple, he can fit into tight spaces, and he's got half and quarter alpha charges. and they can blast holes, make openings without making a noise, and not draw any attention. And Ferris explains to Solace that Trevor has had a past, and Solace says that if she takes out the toolkit, they can fit Trevor in. And that's when Solace says to Ferris that Trevor... Solace just refers to Trevor as the kid here, but she just says to Ferris, look, the kid can handle himself, you could too at his age. And then tells Ferris to relax. And Trevor then cuts in and says Ferris doesn't know the meaning of that word. And Solace and Trevor laugh at Ferris. And it brings Ferris a bit of comfort to be laughed at, and it felt like a friendship. And I think that's a touching thing with Ferris. Anyway, then Ferris goes to say goodbye to the arrays that have been brought to the Place of Solace. I have to keep calling it the Place of Solace, because you got Solace as in the character fight or Rhino, you got Solace as in the place Solace. So, yeah, but he goes to say goodbye to the arrays, and he says that they're going to be taking off soon, and that he, Trevor, and Solace, the fighter, are going to break back into the temple, find out what Malorum is up to, and find out who the spy is, etc. And Hume says, we're coming with you. And Ferris just says that no, there's no room in the speeder, and besides, you came all this way to find Solace, you found it, you're safe here. And he also explains that Solace's assistant, I was wrong, Donal isn't Solace's bodyguard, he's her assistant, so he says that Donal will be taking care of them as well. And as Ferris gets up to go, he looks at all the arrays that are there, Keats, Raya, etc. And even though they had only known each other for a short time, Ferris felt tied to them. He felt tied to their struggle to stay alive. And Curran says, the journey begins, so go. And it's because on Curran's homeworld, on the Civiliani homeworld, saying goodbye is bad luck. Anyway, that's when Ferris goes back to Solace and Trevor. They're already in position, and Ferris gets into the passenger seat, and Solace explains that she knows about, and they start going through the tunnels, and Solace explains that she knows about many other tunnels, and they shoot up through a crack, take the main, I think it's something, it's like highway or something like that, and Solace explains that it took her months to find the parts to build this craft, and to build it, and that's when she did. It was quite hard to find the columns of the temple that go down to the crust, because they're covered by, because it's about a century after they were laid, they got covered by garbage and trash and buildings for that, and eventually they come up to it, and she weaves through. And then she says to hold tight, and they go shooting at one of the columns. And Trevor is just, again, in absolute amazement how it's taken them so long to get down to the crust. And now all these levels, all these floors, people, platforms, cloud cars, air taxis, etc., buildings are just shooting by him at an insane speed. And it's taken him so long to get, down there, and now they're very quickly going up, and it just amazed Trevor. And again, I think this is one thing about Trevor, especially in this chapter. He's very much got a big... It's definitely very much the eyes of the audience for the most part in this chapter. We see things quite a bit from his perspective in this chapter. And again, it's what I said in a few chapters ago. You know, Trevor, he is an excellent eye for the audience. We really get to see into his mind on his awe of things, and I think it's something that we generally don't really think about a whole lot when we're reading or watching stuff. But then we see it from Trevor's point of view, and he's the one who gets in awe, and it draws you in. You also feel the awe and go, yeah, this is actually very interesting. So yeah, that's another thing with Trevor that I quite like. Anyway, they eventually feel the speed slow down, and Vitor explains that right then they've got to be quick. They're going to go to Malorum's office first, find out who the spy is, and also for Ferris to get all the files about what Malorum knows about Police Master. Then they're going to get the lightsabers and get out. They have to be quick. They just need to get in and out and be as quick as possible. And eventually they get to the base of the temple, and even Trevor can see that even the base has been damaged. It's blackened, it's broken, etc. There's pieces crumbling off. Eventually, after a bit of scouting around, Solus finds the place that she's about to cut into, and she activates the plasma jets, and they go through and they go up into the main turbo lift shaft that she was talking about, and they go through and they get out, and they go into the turbo lift up ahead with the hallway that's crumbled down, and she explains that there's a service hallway ahead, or maybe it's just said that there's a service hallway ahead by the book. I can't remember which one, whether it's the book or or Solus. But they get in there, and they wait for a moment, and Trevor looks over notices that Solus and Ferris seem to be connecting for a moment. They're not saying anything, but they seem to be connecting, and he knows, and Trevor just knows it's the Force, just because of how quiet Ferris is. He could tell when the Force was present, but just because Ferris went ever so quiet when accessing it. And then without words, Ferris cuts open a hole in the what's it called in the door, and they start going through the service hallway, and that's when Trevor and they're trying to be as quiet as possible, and Trevor almost trips on a conductor cable, and he is able to catch himself, and he breaks a sweat thinking about the noise that could have been made from that, and he notices that there are scrapes and stuff on the vents, on the power vents. But eventually they get to the main hallway, and they get into Malorum's office, and they find it it is a bit peculiar that there are no stormtroopers. But anyway, Ferris immediately goes over to Malorum's desk, only to find that there are no holo files and no data pads. There are no holo files, no data pads. And Solus is a bit disappointed, and it's, oh no, I can't find the name of the spy. And that's when the lights dim for a moment and turn back on, and Trevor just is nervous and tells himself, no, it's just a glitch. But then eventually his anxiety takes over. He takes out pretty much the Star Wars equivalent of a screwdriver. It says something like a servo driver or something like that. And he takes off a panel and tells them to wait. Oh, but before that, Ferris does say he's wondering why there are no stormtroopers. He was expecting it to be packed with stormtroopers, more than before, but there aren't any. And that's when the glitch for the lights happen, and Trevor takes off a panel off a wall and tells them to wait. And he looks in the panel for a moment and says that it looks like And he also thinks back to the power vents and the conductor wire he almost tripped over. And he explains that they're draining the power. And Solus and Ferris wonder why, ask why, and Trevor says that he doesn't quite know why, but it seems like they're trying to, what was it in specific? I can think of only one reason, Trevor said. A version of a sleeper bomb. They've tapped different power stations all at once to fuel it. They're draining the power to build the explosion. They've gone into different power vents. I'd say they wanted to tap enough power to blow the entire temple. And that's when Ferris immediately clocks on that it's Malorum. He's trying to blow up the temple. And even though, because Vader told him to do it, even though Vader wasn't serious, it's Malorum's way to disgrace Vader in the eyes of the Emperor, because he can say Vader gave the order. And Vader technically did give the order. And that's when Ferris immediately asks Trevor after he realises that, how much time do they have? And Trevor gives a very God what explanation, and even Ferris just goes, so what does that mean? And Trevor says, it's going to explode soon, minutes. And we won't have enough time to get out the way we came. And immediately Solus and Ferris start scheming about what to do. Solus says they can get out through the front entrance, but they could have to leave the temple behind to let it get destroyed. Ferris says, but they can't leave the temple and let it be destroyed. And Solus says, neither can I. So that's where we end off the chapter. I very much enjoyed this chapter. A short little story for this chapter. I was meaning to read it yesterday. I'll say yesterday. Oh wait, no. It was yesterday. And I was too tired to. But I was also not tired enough to go to sleep. I was too tired to read, but not tired enough to sleep. And and it was really frustrating me, and it went on for probably about 6, 7, 8 hours, and I was so frustrated that I couldn't read the chapter, so I'm happy I have now. But anyway, that moment at the beginning of the chapter though, I think that's the big part of the chapter that I want to talk about, because, again, I've already talked about it, but it is such an impactful moment. It is just so impactful, especially because Trevor doesn't often bring up his past. It's not often brought up, and while I do think that does work to the detriment of Trevor a lot of the time, I think for this moment in particular, the fact we've been starved of Trevor's past really made this hit hard. It really made it hit hard. And you just understand that pain that Trevor's feeling. You just immediately know, oh poor Trevor. And you just know that he's not going to have this. It's happened 3 times, well 2 times really, but it happened 2 times, one with his mother, the other time with his father and brother. But it just hits hard for him. And he's not letting this happen again. And the thing is, if he didn't go, because we know they're going to survive, let's be honest. We know they're going to survive. First, Trevor, and I'm fairly sure Solus appear in the later Last of the Jedi books. But, you know, if Trevor didn't go, he wouldn't figure out that there was a sleeper bomb, probably, if there is a sleeper bomb. And Phytorna and Ferris probably would have died. and history would have repeated itself. And I think, again, this is just such an impactful thing as for Trevor. And I do quite like in this chapter that we do spend quite a lot of it from Trevor's perspective. Really, with the exception of Ferrus saying goodbye to the Erased, it is entirely told from Trevor's perspective. Also, when they're going up the column, Trevor's trying to stop himself from feeling dizzy. But anyway, and it is just, again, such an impactful moment. That moment at the beginning. And I really do hope we get to see more moments like that. And I think for Trevor, Ferrus is the closest thing he has to a parental figure. And I think, and someone that can look after him, and someone that kind of lives up to what his father, mother and brother were like. And I think that's why he keeps staying. As much as he always tries to abandon Ferrus, as much as he thought about abandoning Ferrus, and as much as Ferrus keeps trying to get rid of him, they are very much intrinsically tied. They are very much tied together. And even though, you know, Ferrus is trying to protect Trevor and trying to keep him out of danger, Trevor, he doesn't care about that. He cares about the safety of Ferrus. And even though he got angry at Ferrus for not saving him, it's a bit like the family dynamic where you get angry at, you can sometimes get frustrated, but you forgive each other in the end because you're family. And I think you can kind of see that breaking through with Trevor here. And I think it's so sweet. And again, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Jude Watson couldn't have picked a better pairing of characters for these books. And also a better dynamic for these characters. I think it works just so well. I think Ferrus and Trevor just work so well together. They really do. And it's just absolutely wonderful when we get these moments like this, like that in the start of this chapter. So yeah. Again, not really much else to say about the chapter. Again, it is a lot of the plot moving, and not really a whole lot to talk about. I think the main thing I probably have to talk about is Malorum. Because Malorum, he's been quite an interesting character, to say the least. And I think it is such... Malorum's ever so smug. He's so smug, but he's also very intelligent. He's quite intelligent, to an extent. He's intelligent, but, you know, not Thrawn intelligent. And I think this just really shows how Malorum just is, how much Malorum just goes. So, yeah, I don't really quite know how to put it into words, but I think it is interesting how Malorum is twisting Vader's commands into his favour, and I think that is an interesting thing to see from Malorum. So, I know the next book is the last book to feature Malorum. I know Death on Naboo is the last one because, again, spoilers. I haven't read it. No, I haven't read it. I know that's the last. I know that Malorum is the death on Naboo. I know he dies in that book. That's the death on Naboo, and yeah. Honestly, after Death on Naboo, I have no idea where Last of the Jedi is headed. because Malorum is the one character. Malorum and Sankor were the two characters in Last of the Jedi that gave me some idea of what the initial books would be like. But now that both of them will wind up dead, I have no idea what the plot's gonna be. To be fair, I didn't really have any idea what the plot of Underworld will be, and I have no idea what the plot of Death on Naboo will be. But you know, it's even then, there's still some connections to Police Master. That was the main thing I was aware of going into Last of the Jedi. So I am going to be very interested to read, sorry, don't tell me, but you know, I want to read it myself. But yeah, I'm going to be very interested to know, because of Hydra's page on her Wikipedia is not very well, it's not thoroughly gone through, aside from she investigated Alderaan with Ferrus, I'm fairly sure, and I could be very wrong on that, because if I know Ferrus winds up becoming Leia's personal protector, but yeah, I'm going to be very interested. I don't know why I'm talking about Death on Naboo. This is meant to be my review of Chapter 14 of Underworld. Okay, I'll just shut up now and end the review here, because if I continue talking, this is going to stray way further off from the review of Chapter 14. So, yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. I'll see you in the next review. Hello, I have just read Chapter 15 of The Last of the Jedi, Underworld. So we immediately pick up where we last left off. Well, say where we last left off. We have a little bit of a jump, but not by much. We now got Ferrus, Trevor and Solus running through the main hallways of the Jedi Temple. Malorum and the officers have evacuated the stormtroopers, so there is a bomb. And they've left attack droids to ensure that no intruders can mess up the explosion. And Ferrus and Solus all start slicing up the droids with their blue lightsabers, and Solus is much better with a lightsaber than Ferrus. She doesn't waste movements, and Trevor is a bit behind, but the short combats against the droids, the short fights, do allow Trevor to catch up a bit. And eventually they get to the main core room, the Sublight generator room, the main room with that. Trevor explains that they need to drain the power, and that they have to do it gradually, otherwise they could set the bomb off. And so Ferrus immediately gets onto the computer console and starts disarming it gradually and slowly until all the lights went from green to yellow to red. And then Solus asks now what, and Trevor says that we wait and see if it goes off. And once he starts seeing the lights start receding, he says, okay, the power's draining, you can destroy it now, it's dead. And Ferrus goes and slices it neatly in half. And they have a bit of a talk. Hold on. There we go. And they talk a little bit about the temple. Solus asks how long until they figure it out, and Ferrus says no, it's not soon. All of them will want to have seen the temple blow up. And Trevor explains that they stopped him, but all he has to do is set up another sleeper bomb, or whatever it was called. And Ferrus says he thinks Vader will try to stop Malorum, and that the Emperor wanted the temple to remain as a symbol of the Jedi and their destruction. and how it's the symbol of the wreck of the Jedi, as Ferris puts it, but to him, it's, as Ferris puts it, a symbol of what they can be again. And Solace just says, I don't know if it's a symbol of anything anymore, I just know it was my home, and I don't want them to blow it up. And they start making their way to the main entrance, and that's when they start hearing stormtroopers coming in, and the stormtroopers flood in, and Malorum's there heading the group, and he winds up getting lost in the sea of stormtroopers as it's described, and he just screams, "Find them!" And so now Ferris, Trevor and Solace's best shot is to get to Solace's craft, or ship as they put it, but let's be honest, it's more of a craft. And so they start bolting down the hallways as Seeker droids trying to find them out ahead, and one of the Seeker droids catches them, starts chasing them, and Ferris slices it in half with his lightsaber. And eventually, soon after he does it, the stormtroopers start coming, and Solace knows that, oh, they've got this, they've found them on surveillance. Their surveillance, they were caught, and they eventually make it back through the service tunnel to the entrance to the hole that Ferris cut, and he hurries Trevor through, Solace goes through, and Ferris looks ahead and sees that he deflects some bolts, he's about to go back in, and that's when at least 50 stormtroopers, as it's described, coming, and with some of them on AT-RTs, and Ferris knows he can't fight them, and he sees in Trevor's eyes the absolute pain in there. Let me see if I can get to the page. There we go. And I'll just read it off. He looks at Trevor, whose eyes were wide, pleasing. "I'll be back," he yells. "I told you not to say that!" And that's when Ferris deactivates his lightsaber and throws it in the air, and Solace catches it, and Ferris sees that Solace is considering joining him, making that last stand. And Ferris knows he can't have that, and he tells Solace to make sure that Trevor is safe, and he tells her to get Trevor out of there. And so that's when she does go for Trevor. And Trevor's hammering and punching her back as they set off. And as again, Trevor, he doesn't want to leave Ferris behind. He doesn't know if he's going to see Ferris again. We all know he probably does, but he doesn't. And he has so much trauma about losing his family, especially with the words, "It's too dangerous, stay here, you'll be safe here, we'll be back." That brings up a lot of trauma for Trevor, and it's really upsetting to see him have to go through this again. And Ferris turns to face the stormtroopers, and he knows they'll be capturing him alive, because he knows Malorum will want him alive. And that's where we leave off the chapter. It's a really big cliffhanger, this one. I like that again Trevor takes a bit of command of the situation. Again, he's very much an expert in tech. He's a tech expert, and I like that he takes command of the situation. And how, whereas Ferris is typically very good when it comes to the combat, Trevor's quite good when it comes to the technical sides of things, especially with explosives. And so I do like that he took a bit of command from the situation. For the ending though, again, I already kind of talked about it, but it is again just so impactful. It is so impactful. And while I have been critical that we don't see enough of Trevor's past, it doesn't get mentioned enough. I do think because it hasn't been mentioned enough, it makes the scenes like these so much more impactful. Because he's constantly kind of putting down that pain and trauma. But when he's finally thrown into situations that brings that up, he breaks. Trevor can't handle it. And I think it's, again, such an interesting and disheartening and upsetting quirk to the character. Especially for a character that's, most times, every other line, cracking a joke. That is actually quite funny. It's quite funny for Trevor. But I think it makes the moments like these just so impactful. And especially because Trevor uses the words, "I'll be back." Those are the words Trevor never wants to hear you say. Especially when you're going into a situation where you could die. Those are the words Trevor never wants to hear you say. And it's just so impactful. It is. And I'm looking forward to finishing the book because I've only got chapters 16 and 17 and then I'm done. I've only got about 7 more pages, so yeah. It is just... I think this might be the best of the Last of the Jedi books so far. And I think Desperate Mission, it was good. But again, I think Desperate Mission is a bit better than Dark Warning. But you know, Desperate Mission, that was a pretty good story. And you know, it had quite a lot going on. Dark Warning was a bit more... I don't think it was quite as good, but it definitely felt like it was a bit more of a side quest, if anything. And Underworld, again, still feels a bit like a side quest, but I think it's a bit more of an interesting side quest. And Dark Warning, personally. And I do think we've had a lot of great character moments in this. We've had a lot of great moments from Ferrus. We've had a lot of great moments from Trevor. We've met quite a few good characters. We've had a bit more of Malorum. You know, I think this book did a lot more I think, than Dark Warning. Again, I don't know why I'm talking about the book as if I finished it, which I haven't, but I think compared to Dark Warning, which felt like it was trying to set up a whole load of stuff, Underworld doesn't feel like it's trying to set up the future books. It very much feels like it's trying to continue the story. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think it is maybe just a bit better than Dark Warning. Whereas Dark Warning, you know, that was very much setting up the story in the middle of the story, if that makes sense. And it works. I think Jude Watson did good with it, but I don't quite think it was... Again, I enjoyed the book. I want to make it clear. I did enjoy Dark Warning. I just don't think it was as good as Underworld or like Desperate Mission. Anyway, I don't think it's a bad book in the slightest. I do think Dark Warning is quite good, but it is just, compared to Underworld and Desperate Mission, it's just not as good. Anyway, I'm going, like last chapter, I'm going to wind up going on a tangent again if I don't end the review here, so... yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 16 of The Last of the Jedi Underworld, so now I only have one more chapter to go. So, Ferrus is in the prison. He doesn't know where the prison is, he just knows that he's on Coruscant. As we learn, he has a bruise on the back of his head from the stun baton that hit him there, and his legs are still tingling up to the back of his knees from the shock. And and he knows that this is only the beginning, and he thinks back to when he was last in prison and how he had at last escaped, and he doesn't think he'll be that lucky this time. And he just knows that he's going to make the interview as hard for Malorum as it can be. And he knows that one thing you really don't want is an Inquisitor with a grudge. And that's when Malorum walks in, and Ferris knows that Malorum's getting enjoyment out of the situation. And that's when he decides, okay, he's going to give Malorum a hard time. And he says to Malorum, oh, we've got to stop meeting like this. And Malorum just says, very amusing. And Ferris immediately starts saying, no, I'm serious, you need to get out of this prison, see the galaxy, have some fun. And Malorum just says, I am having fun right now, I'm enjoying this immensely. And Ferris sarcastically remarks, oh wow, me too, now we're finally bonding. And that's when Malorum says that they should finally talk. And Ferris just says, he stretches out his legs, and they do have a bit of pain going on that nearly makes him wince, but not quite. And he just thinks to himself to be a Jedi, be the Jedi he never was, and that he needs to centre himself. And he needs to accept his fear and find his centre. And Malorum says, let's talk about the Jedi, and that he underestimated him. And thought he left them behind, never to look back, but now he's looking for the Jedi. And who was the Jedi he was with just? And who was the Jedi he was with? And Ferris goes, well, I was once a Jedi long ago. There were thousands of them. Malorum just goes, no, the Jedi you were with today. And when they broke into, as he says, Imperial property. And what is the name of the Jedi he was with on Balasa? As I think he assumes they're the same. And Ferris says that, oh, he never mentioned his name. And Malorum finds that hard to believe. And Ferris says, now that's the difference between you and me. If all your friends have been wiped out, do you really think you'll be going around sharing your name with people? And that's when Malorum says, if I was a coward. And Ferris just says, but in my opinion, cowardice is underrated, it keeps you alive. And Malorum says, oh well, if being alive is so important to you, that's a pity. And then Ferris continues to make his jokes and says, oh, now you're feeling sorry for me now, I didn't know you cared. Malorum just laughs and says that he's seen this before, and that Ferris will be surprised at how often people put up a bravado in the face of death. And Ferris says he doesn't really much care about being unique and that he was a Jedi after all. Malorum says, well, I suppose you are all the same hypocrites who are hungry for power, who tried to take over the Senate and kill Palpatine. They did it all while in the humility of the robes they wore and cloaks, and says it was a good scam, but it's over. Ferris says he loves the rhythm of the party line. Just say the lies loud enough and long enough and put a drum beat behind it, and the next thing you know, everyone is singing the same tune. Malorum tries to say that the truth is that, and he gets immediately cut off by Ferris. And Ferris says that the truth is that the Republic is now an empire at the hands of Palpatine, who is only hungry for power and interested in increasing his power. And that Malorum is just as lucky, and that Palpatine is only interested in having more power. And Malorum tries to tell him that this isn't a debate and that it's been fun, but if he isn't going to cooperate. And Ferris cuts in again and says, you go have ways to make me talk? Let me think. Torture is still against the bylaws of the Senate last time I heard. And that's when Malorum tells him, the Senate agreed to give Palpatine more freedom in how he handles enemies. And Ferris just thinks, the Senate continues to... The Senators continue to give Palpatine anything he wants, and that he's breaking the agreements the Senate was founded on. And that that Palpatine was clever, and how he always acted with the approval of the Senate, and in a way where the Senate could never say no. And Malorum makes it clear he's sending Ferris off to a prison world and he'll be executed. That is where no one goes, and that if he doesn't reveal the name of the Jedi he knows that are alive, they will be executed for crimes against the Empire. And he says to Ferris that his name has already been forgotten on Belasa, and that's when Ferris continues to make jokes, saying, well, I never call, I never write. And Malorum just says, I'm talking to a dead man, Malorum said, and it's time for my lunch. And Malorum leaves with, as it's described, with the same indifference he had with in the interview, and that's where we end off the chapter. Okay, I think it's... Ferris... This is really the point where we haven't had a lot of jokes from Ferris. I know he's not typically always giving jokes, but this is probably the most he's joked in the yearbooks so far, and I think this is actually quite... It's both humorous and dark, the scene. And the way Ferris is pretty much in control of the interview, and now he's the one really interviewing Malorum. And I think that's ever so funny, especially with who Malorum thinks he is. He thinks he's this grand figure, but he's really not. He's really not that grand at all. And Ferris sees through his facade, and is immediately able to say, and is just able to keep making jokes surrounding things, and even though Ferris is afraid, he really just keeps making his way through it in such a humorous and entertaining way. And you can just tell that Malorum is just... He's seen this before, he's experienced this, but you just know he doesn't like it. He doesn't like people putting on a show for him every single time he goes to interrogate them. You know, you really just get that feeling from Malorum, and he said in the beginning, you know, he thinks he's in control, but by the end, he just gets straight to the point, and he just doesn't want to continue with Ferris. So it was quite funny, but yeah. I have only one more chapter to read now. That's only 3 pages, if that, because I know technically it's 2 pages, about nearly 2 or so, but because of how, you know, they've got the first page, which about a quarter of it's been cut off by the chapter title, and the last page has barely got any text on it, so only got 4 lines of it, so yeah. But that is my review for chapter 16, and I'll be back in a moment with my review for chapter 17, so bye. Hello, I've just read chapter 17 of The Last of the Jedi Underworld, and in turn I have finished the book. Now I want to mention something from chapter 15 which I didn't mention in my chapter 15 review, and that is, it was made clear that when Ferris threw his lightsaber to fight, or it was because he was going to be captured, but not his lightsaber. So I just wanted to make that clear. I was meant to mention it in last review, but I failed to. I forgot to. So anyway, Trevor it's become with Trevor and Solace, and they're in the little parking spots that Solace had, and Trevor is just screaming and yelling at Solace, and he's just furious at us, saying, "You left him behind." And Solace said that he chose to be captured. It was his choice, and Trevor is saying, "Jedi to save other Jedi." But you don't do that, do you? That's twice now. You've shown that you don't have much in the way of loyalty, really. And Solace just is impassive. She isn't showing any emotion, and Trevor can't tell if she's angry. But he wants her to be angry. He wants to fight. And that's when Solace says, "We'll find him." And that completely takes Trevor off guard, and he goes, as if it's words in the distance, and he just goes, "What?" Solace goes, "We'll find him. I won't stop until we find him. This isn't over, but we need supplies and information." And that's when Solace stops for a moment, as if she's listening with nothing to hear to. And Trevor is confused and goes, "Solace, what?" And that's when Solace runs off. And Trevor tries to keep behind, and that's when Solace leaps up the catwalks, and Trevor just knows it's force assisted because it's too impossible. And that's when blasts of fire and screams are heard. And that's when Keats appears at the top of the catwalk, at the edge of the catwalk, and just tumbles down, and he's all bloody, there's blood leaking from a wound, and he just lands at Trevor's feet. And that's when Donal appears at the edge of the catwalk as well, and says that they're under attack. And Trevor just thinks Solace was right, this isn't nearly over. And he prepares himself, and he's getting himself ready, and Trevor starts to get himself ready to fight, and that's where we end off Last of the Jedi Underworld. So, I do like how Trevor is really angry at this. Because again, these last few chapters really have gone deep with bringing in Trevor's past. And this is just continues that. And it is, again, just so heartbreaking. And you really do feel for Trevor. Now, I'm going to talk about the whole book now, because I don't really have too much to say on this chapter, because it is so short, and it is just setting up the next book, really. I quite enjoy the book. I definitely think it's better than Dark Warning. Again, for me, I think the rankings so far... Oh, do I put Underworld above Desperate Mission or not? I'm going to go Desperate Mission at my top, then Underworld, then Dark Warning for now. I think the Desperate Mission is probably the best one out of the three so far. I think Underworld probably is definitely a bit better than Dark Warning. I said in one of the earlier reviews in this video that, yeah, I do think Dark Warning was a bit of... was a little bit filler, I think, because it was just a lot of setting stuff up. But, yeah. There was a lot in this book, and it's sad that Keats is dead. I think he's dead at least, because I really like Keats. You recall Higher, whatever it's meant to be, maybe Higher. He would call a Sweet Blossom, and it's all. But I quite enjoy this book. I do think it is a bit disappointing we didn't get more of Dexter Jetster, because it does feel a bit like it felt like we were going to see him again later on in the book, and we just did not. You know, he appeared at the end of one chapter, appeared once, and then appeared in the next chapter, and hasn't appeared again. So it does feel a bit But yeah, I quite enjoyed the book. I'm going to be very interested to see where Death on Naboo goes, because again, aside from the Police Master storyline and Ferrus and Hydra trying to find Leia, I don't really know a whole lot about what goes on in these books. And the Police Master storyline, you know, as far as I knew, it was Obi-Wan was going to come across Malorum and Sancor, which I eventually learned when reading Dark Warning. Oh no, Malorum was not present at all in Dark Warning. It was only mentioned. But yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see where Underworld winds up going. So, I mean, Death on Naboo, sorry, because I know Malorum's going to die in that. So I know that's where the book. I know that's where that said it. But yeah. Again, I don't really have a whole lot to say on Underworld at the moment. I do think it worked with Trevor right at the end again. That was so heartbreaking. It was so impactful. I think at the start, with all of Ferris's memories, some of them were a bit humorous and some of them really were quite impactful. And I'm a bit sad that the Erased do seem, especially with Keats, but the Erased do seem to be maybe dead, unfortunately. Especially, it's a shame because I really like Keats. Keats was so good, but now he's dead. But yeah, I'm just going to be rambling on if I continue this, so yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.